I'd like to tell you, if I may, a gripping tale of sporting achievement.
Last Sunday was the Jungle Cup final.
The insects versus the mammals.
Sadly, the mammals were just too strong for the poor insects.
By half-time, the insects were 13-0 down.
Back in the insect dressing room,
The manager did his best to pick up his downhearted troops.
And sent them back out to resume battle.
Well, alas, the second half
Was just as one-sided as the first.
And with 5 minutes to go, the score was an embarrassing 24-0.
When the insect manager
pulls off an earwig and brings on a millipede.
Anyway, this millipede's brilliant and he starts banging in goals from all over the pitch.
By the final whistle, it scored
25 goals.
And the insects win the cup.
25-24.
And after the match, John Motson asks the manager,
How come you didn't play him from the start?
And the manager replies,
I would have done, but he was
Putting his boots on.
Well, you've got to laugh, haven't you?
Could you just run that past me again?
The Janus reps are playing games.
Begin when you're ready.
They need concentration,
Keep your eye. If he offers you a job, turn it down.
tactics,
You think I'm hitting on you?
How do you know I wasn't just playing hard to get?
and plenty of stamina.
You've got a girlfriend, not a proper one. I'm still practicing.
They're in for a surprise.
I have seen everything now. Literally.
Take a break with the Sunburn team next Saturday at 5 to 9 on BBC One.
Men assume women are only impressed by a combination of brains and brawn.
They're right, of course.
A woman's place
Murder is no business for a woman. You should be at home.
is hot on the trail.
Much obliged, madam.
Bravo, George.
I take it I've managed to spark the flames of your curiosity.
I'm positively aglow.
Mrs. Bradley.
It would be the cream in my coffee any day.
Tomorrow at 8 on BBC One.
You cut it a bit fine.
With highlights of all of today's Premiership action, including Aston Villa, Chelsea and Liverpool Middlesbrough, Match of the Day is in 15 minutes. The BBC News and Sport first on BBC One with Peter Sissons and Sue Thurl.
Ulster Unionists warned that the new devolved government could be facing collapse. Their leader says it all hangs on proof soon of IRA decommissioning. An extraordinary military coup in Ecuador restoring civilian rule within hours. And a fishing boat blazes in mountainous seas. A dramatic rescue early today in the Orkneys. Good evening. Senior figures in the Ulster Unionist Party have given their most explicit warning yet that it's back to direct rule from Westminster if the IRA doesn't start decommissioning its weapons soon. David Trimble said there must be some evidence of decommissioning before the end of the month for the new devolved government to continue. Sinn Féin accused him of creating a crisis that was no part of the Good Friday Agreement. Our Ireland correspondent David Eads reports.
Here at Stormont, devolved government is still very much in its infancy, and yet it may be nearing the end of its life if the IRA does not decommission very soon indeed. The leader of the Ulster Unionists made it clear today his party could not carry on in the current power-sharing executive with Sinn Féin if the IRA has not made a start by the end of the month.
If things don't work out as we hoped, and if it proves impossible to sustain the administration in its present form, then the only immediate recourse is direct rule. And the only way of carrying on the political process is some form of review in the circumstances that then obtain.
It's up to the Canadian General, Sir John de Chastelain, to decide whether or not the IRA has begun to decommission. Security sources say there is no indication it's about to do so. And there's little time for that to change. The General must report by the end of the month. All parties to the process say they'll accept his assessment. 2 weeks later, Ulster Unionists are due to decide on their future within the executive. It may already be suspended, though, as the government aims for IRA decommissioning by May, the target date in the Good Friday Agreement. Sinn Féin rejects the idea the IRA is running out of time and says Mr Trimble has no right to precipitate a crisis at this stage.
There is no deadline, there is no precondition, and ask, others other than Sinn Féin, and they will have to agree with that. But we have to work towards an objective. Sinn Féin believes that decommissioning is an essential part of the peace process, We've stated it publicly, and that's firmly our position.
David Trimble says he's not yet given up hope of the IRA doing something this month, but if he is disappointed, the recriminations will be huge, the executive will at best be suspended, and Northern Ireland will once again be in the grip of a political crisis. David Eads, BBC News, Stormont.
The Vice President of Ecuador, Gustavo Noboa, has declared himself the country's new leader, apparently with the support of the military. It follows a coup which started when soldiers and Indian protesters stormed government buildings in the capital, Quito. Here, the Foreign Office condemned the coup and called for the restoration of democracy.
Last night, it seemed the leaders of Ecuador's coup had succeeded. They addressed their ecstatic supporters from the balcony of the presidential palace, from where the deposed President Mawad had fled only hours earlier. The three coup leaders said they had the support of the military, and they promised to end President Mawad's disastrous economic policy, which they claimed had been the cause of months of bitterness and protests. Thousands of Ecuadorian Indians, accompanied by rebellious military units, stormed the parliament and other key buildings. Their movement appeared unstoppable. Ecuador's economy has been in rapid decline, and much of the blame for this has been put on the ousted President Mawad. Last year, inflation reached 60%, the highest in Latin America. 2/3 of the country's labor force is out of work, and the national currency has collapsed, leading to President Mawad's proposal to adopt the US dollar as Ecuador's national currency. But the coup met strong and swift international condemnation from neighboring countries and Western capitals.
What we don't want, after the 70s and 80s of Latin America being under the shadow of dictatorship, from which only those countries are only just emerging, for them to shift back to dictatorship and military coups, that would send the worst international signal now.
But the coup unraveled after one of its leaders suddenly resigned. American officials threatened to cut foreign aid, and the army suddenly switched their support to Vice President Gustavo Noboa. Raggy Omar, BBC News.
5 fishermen have been rescued from their blazing boat in treacherous seas. Coast Guards received a mayday call in the early hours saying the boat, Be Ready, was on fire 30 miles northwest of the Orkney Islands.
The blaze was so fierce the crew could only take what shelter they could from the flames and the smoke. A small fire in the galley had taken hold in minutes, quickly engulfing the wheelhouse. Only a nearby ship, the Mizpah, could get close. Force aid winds meant the helicopter taking these pictures couldn't risk lifting the men from the deck. The only chance was to get a line across from the Mizpah, but by now the crew were tired and cold.
The Mizpah actually had to come and ram us, go past us, and actually hit us to get a rock past, nearly passed across hand by hand, because we couldn't get it thrown. We were so cold by that point.
The line meant a life raft could be pulled across, the crew struggling with the smoke and a deck becoming red hot. Only when the last man was on board could the rescue helicopter move in to pick them up.
They climbed down a ladder over the bow into the life raft, and they cut the line, and then we closed in on the life raft and winched them 2 at a time from the life raft.
The crew suffered only from smoke inhalation. Even their rescuers said they were lucky to escape with their lives. Valerie Jones, BBC News.
Russian forces in Chechnya have taken control of the largest village in the rebel stronghold in the southern mountains. Fierce fighting is continuing in the capital Grozny as Russian forces advance towards the centre. But as our correspondent Andrew Harding reports, they've again met stiff resistance from Chechen fighters.
The battle for Grozny rages on. Russian troops inch forwards under fire from Chechen snipers. For a month now, the two sides have fought for control of these streets, a nuclear superpower against a small band of guerrillas. Against the odds, the Chechen rebels are still clinging on to what's left of the city centre. Outside Grozny, Russian forces are making better progress. Today, they announced they'd finally seized control of Vedino, a rebel stronghold in the mountains. The Russians are hoping to cut their supply lines and escape routes. Elsewhere in the Republic, Russian troops remain on high alert. These soldiers are guarding another important town, Urus-Martan. It's quiet here at the moment, but no one knows how long that will last. The locals don't want the rebels back, but few people seem to trust the Russians either. I wish they'd all just leave us in peace, said this man. Our republic has suffered enough. But there can be no stability here until Russian forces have captured Grozny, and perhaps not even then. The Russians are promising victory and peace in Chechnya within the next couple of months, but they may need to keep tens of thousands of troops stationed here for years to come if they're to keep the rebels at bay. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Chechnya.
The funeral has taken place in Madrid of the army officer killed by an explosion yesterday. Hundreds of mourners attended, including the Spanish Prime Minister, José María Aznar. The officer's death, which is being blamed on Basque terrorists, has led to widespread protests across Spain. More demonstrations are planned over the next few days. The company that runs the Millennium Dome has insisted that it has no plans to lay off staff. Workers at the Dome were worried after press reports suggested there could be redundancies unless visitor numbers picked up.
Today saw a good turnout. Actor Christopher Reeve, best known as Superman, was just one of the visitors. But most weekdays there are large empty spaces. Only half the numbers catered for have been turning up. And reports that staff could be laid off prompted demands this morning for some specific assurances.
Yeah, members were very concerned to wake up this morning to read that rather than working at the Millennium Dome, they were in fact facing the Millennium Dole. And that's why we warmly welcome the assurances we've been given today.
Since its opening, ministers have had problems defending the Dome, but they deny that recent figures have led to crisis talks.
Of course there have been meetings, but there can't be any visitor attraction in the world in the 2 weeks after it opens, doesn't look to see how it is doing, but that is exactly what you would have expected.
Many more visitors are expected in the summer, but there'll have to be a particularly large increase if targets are to be met and further ministerial embarrassment spared. Gita Hari, BBC News.
Now, with news of the day's Premiership football and the rest of the sport, here's Sue Thurl.
Peter, thank you very much. Well, Michael Owen faces another spell on the sidelines after suffering yet another injury in Liverpool's goalless draw with Middlesbrough. Owen managed less than half an hour at Anfield before limping off with a muscle injury. He could now be out for the next 3 weeks. Southampton ended their poor recent run with all 3 points against Everton. Matt Oakley on the scoresheet in their 2-0 win. And Robbie Earle's goal helped ease Wimbledon's relegation concerns. They beat Newcastle 2-0 at Selhurst Park. The matches between Aston Villa and Chelsea, Bradford against Watford and Tottenham versus Sheffield Wednesday are on Match of the Day after this programme. So if you don't want to know the scores, look away now. In the First Division, Charlton moved 4 points clear at the top of the table with a 3-0 victory at Norwich. Andy Hunt scored all of their goals at Carrow Road. Elsewhere, Barnsley's 5-1 win over Blackburn means they move level on points with Manchester City, who lost at Sheffield United. Ipswich drew at Bolton and Huddersfield beat Tranmere. The Scottish Premier League resumed this afternoon after its 3-week winter break, and Darren Jackson seemed to benefit from the rest. He was on target for Hearts in their win over Dundee. Now, viewers in Scotland can see the matches between Rangers and Aberdeen and St Johnstone against Motherwell in Sports Scene after this programme. So again, if you don't want to know the scores, look away now. Both defending singles champions are safely through to the 4th round of the Australian Open tennis in Melbourne. Martina Hingis reached the last 16 with a straight sets win over home player Elisa Molik. She now faces Sandrine Testu of France. And in the men's competition, Yevgeny Kafelnikov also won in straight sets against Austria's Stefan Kubek. He next plays Belgian qualifier Christoph Rochus. And don't forget, British #1 Tim Henman plays America's Chris Woodruff in the last 16 in the early hours of tomorrow morning. Melbourne Storm are Rugby League's new World Club champions. The Australians were by far the better side as they humiliated St Helens by 44 points to 6 at Wigan's JJB Stadium this evening.
A new century, but could St Helens provide a new start after British Rugby League's recent troubles at club and international level? The short answer was no. Melbourne were as stylish and durable as their Australasian peers, and the heroic defence which helped Saints win the grand final was non-existent as Aaron Mule canted in for the opening score. With 10 minutes on the clock, the contest was effectively over. Tony Martin's guile opened up the St Helens line again for Wayne Evans to touch down. as the Storm underlined their superiority with 4 first-half tries. And there was no respite for the home side after the break, as Melbourne added 4 more. Robbie Ross strolling over after the Saints' defence had been left in tatters yet again. Spirits were lifted briefly when Sean Hoppy scrambled over just before the end, but it was barely a consolation. The status of British Rugby League was put firmly in perspective as Melbourne added their names to the overcrowded list of Australian world champions. Nigel Adderley, BBC News.
And that's all the sport from me now. Peter.
And before we go, the death has been announced today of the legendary cricket commentator and writer E.W. Swanton. He died in hospital at the age of 92. Jim Swanton spent more than 30 years broadcasting for the BBC. The former Test umpire Dickie Bird said he was probably the finest journalist he'd ever met. And that's the latest BBC News Tonight. From Sue and me, good night.
The actor Christopher Reeve will be having breakfast with Frost tomorrow morning on BBC One, an exclusive interview at 9 o'clock.
Hello, good evening. There were some wintry showers around today, but there was also some sunshine here in Bournemouth. There was more than 6 hours of sun through the day. And like yesterday, Penzance was the warmest place with a top temperature of 10 Celsius, that's 50 Fahrenheit. However, it didn't feel quite that mild because there was a bitter northerly wind. And throughout the rest of tonight and tomorrow, the wind will continue to blow from the north. You can see how these arrows get smaller. That's showing that the wind is going to slowly ease down as we go through the day tomorrow. Despite the lighter winds, though, it will still feel cold with a top temperature of just 4 to 6 degrees. Now, through the rest of this evening and overnight, we'll continue to see wintry showers in eastern areas. Elsewhere, it'll be dry with clear spells, so it is going to turn chilly, temperatures dropping to freezing or perhaps even a little bit below. But for many of us, tomorrow will be dry with plenty of sunshine around. There'll be some showers in the east, but those wintry showers will become confined to Lincolnshire, East Anglia and South East England by the end of the day. And there's a reminder of those temperatures again. Do wrap up warm. Bye-bye.
Helping your kids to revise for their exams can seem a bit demanding, but there is an easier way. The BBC provides the only revision service supporting national tests for 11 and 14-year-olds and GCSE via TV, books and the internet. For your free parent guide, call 08456 101500.
It was brilliant. As soon as you get the word, pow, you let it go.
You know what? That fire support was pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. I hope I never have to get a war with you. That was wet. You know what to do.
Training this tough because the next time it's real. Soldiers to Be, Monday, 9:30, BBC One.
Split identities on BBC One, but Mulder pulls it off in more ways than one. The X-Files at 11:40. Match of the day first on BBC One with Gary Lineker.